So why do a pen test or a penetration test? I know this seems like a very elementary question, or that you would think the answer is pretty straightforward, but there's actually a couple of reasons why we do pen tests. First, I would say that we need to evaluate the current security profile of the organization by simulating an attack to find out what vulnerabilities a malicious attacker could exploit. Can you think of another reason?
Because it's cool, Dale.
I know, I think it's cool too. But another legitimate reason would be to come up with or to create security measures. Since we're actually going after the network, doesn't it make sense to go ahead and figure out or maybe redesign our current security mechanisms? Now, many people feel that the pen test is designed just to point out vulnerabilities, but we will not only point out the vulnerability, but we want to also highlight the effects that that weakness or that vulnerability poses to the company. And upon completion of a pen test, we should deliver a comprehensive report with the details of everything we've discovered. You're going to hear me talk about document throughout this whole course, and you're going to get sick of me talking about it. But you need to do it, and we document everything. Now, you could also argue that pen testing is designed to not only show the gaps in your security model, but it can also help in disaster recovery and business continuity planning. The whole goal is to, again, simulate methods that malicious attackers would use to try to gain access or unauthorized access to your network system. So what makes a good pen test? Well, there's a couple of different things. First of all, organization is number one. You need to make sure that you list objectives of the pen test. Believe it or not, some companies may or may not want certain elements tested. So establishing parameters for those tests should be a main focus, as well as the limits or limitations or justifications of hitting those devices or systems. Another way that you can make sure that you perform a good pen test is to follow a methodology. And we'll talk about methodologies a little bit later on, but you need to focus in on one because most of these methodologies will make sure that you cover all your bases. Documentation is also another important factor of a good pen test. Now, we don't just record down a bunch of geeky garbly goop. We need to make sure that the client can understand what it is we're talking about. And of course, the pen tester needs to make sure that they're available to answer any questions that might come up because of what you've documented. Another way that you can make sure that you do a good pen test is make sure you've got the right tools. Some of these tools will be proprietary, some open source. Some of them will actually do things for you automatically. Others might include scripts as well as just standard command line interfaces. Another way that you can make sure that you have a good pen test is who's involved. You may not be doing this alone. In fact, if you are doing it alone, you need to make sure that you and everybody else involved in the pen test is a legal penetration tester who follows the rules of non-disclosure agreements. I go back to that same statement. You may have heard me say it many times throughout the course. It's my favorite quote by Uncle Ben as he talks to Peter Parker, in case I think I just revealed who Spider-Man is. Oh wait, in Civil War, he exposes himself anyway, so never mind. Before Uncle Ben dies, he tells him, with great power comes great responsibility. You may be seeing things, especially if you're being hired to do a pen test, that could literally destroy a company. It is your job and responsibility, and quite frankly, your integrity to make sure that you help protect the client. You also need to make sure that not only do you point out what's wrong, but when you report the findings, give some recommendations of what needs to be done or what could be done to fix the problem. We don't want to be just Mr. or Mrs. Negative. Offer solutions, please. Now, besides the main 4 reasons of performing a pen test, there's actually a couple of other reasons why as well. One of them might be in the aspect of trying to come up with changes that need to be made to your infrastructure to make you more secure, whether that's hardware or software or even in the network design. We can also use it to create preparation steps to help us prevent exploitations from taking place. Another reason would be to not only look at the effectiveness of your network devices, but also evaluate those, be it firewalls, routers, web servers, file servers, whatever. We'd also want to use it to test and confirm our security defenses and or the controls that we have in place. Just because you had a pen test 6 months ago doesn't mean that something else hasn't changed on your network. Also, it should help us in creating teams or management to help us focus on certain vulnerabilities and security issues and who's in charge of those. We would also use it to help us identify threats that are facing your organization's assets. And this is going to change quite a bit because different businesses are in different industries. For example, hospitals are going to look at different security mechanisms versus a small business. Another reason would be to reduce the organization's expenditures on IT security and enhance the ROI, or the return on investment, when it comes to those security devices by identifying and remediating the vulnerabilities or weaknesses. We can also use it for creating policies, procedures, implementations, and again, as we mentioned before, new designs. We can also use this type of report to help us create policies, processes, implementations, and even designs for your company. Some companies have to worry about certain regulations, such as HIPAA or ISO, or maybe you're trying to get certified. And lastly, to come up with best practices for both legal and industry regulations. Nothing would be worse than you having a data breach and then being sued by a class action lawsuit from your customers because you failed to show that you were trying to protect your data.
Yeah, but Dale, we've already had a security audit.
Well, you're going to hear a lot of different terms being utilized when it comes to different types of tests being done, such as a security audit or vulnerability assessment, and of course, we're talking about pen testing. Some folks might actually use all these terms interchangeably, but there are some considerable differences, such as a security audit just checks whether the organization is following a set of standard security policies and procedures, where a vulnerability assessment actually focuses in on discovering vulnerabilities inside the network, but it provides no indication if the vulnerabilities can be exploited or the amount of damage that could result with someone successfully exploiting that vulnerability. A pen test is a very methodical approach to security assessment that encompasses the security audit as well and demonstrates if the vulnerabilities in the systems can be successfully exploited by the attacker. Now, when it comes to pen testing, you're also going to hear a couple of terms versus the types of teams. And since there's two types of teams, I think let's get ready to rumble. Okay. So the first one is referred to as a red team. And I apologize, I tried to get this to be as red as possible, but somehow it came out maroon. A red team is known as the aggressor team. This is a team of ethical hackers that perform penetration tests on your systems with no or very limited access to the organization's internal resources. Now, red teams attack with or without warning. And the red team may actually include some system administrators from different departments within the organization. The other type of team is referred to as the blue team. The blue team is a defensive team. The blue team has access to all the organizational resources and information. Their primary role is to detect and then try to mitigate the red team's activities and to anticipate how a surprise attack might actually occur. Now, the blue team may include some system administrators and standard IT staff. It's typically the least expensive and the most frequently used security assessment approach. And of course, when I get to work as a red team, I always like throwing out my catchphrase, "Can you smell what the Rock is cooking?" What? Am I watching too much WWE? If you can't tell, my single eyebrow is raised.